the main event that we commemorate for Āsāḷhā is the first formal discourse of the Buddha, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the discourse on setting in motion the wheel of Dhamma. The Dhammacakka is a wheel, and pavattana is to start turning. This is the Anuttarang Dhammacakkang, the unsurpassed, the supreme wheel of Dhamma, which no one can turn back. As it says in the sutta, no God, no devil, no philosopher, priest, ascetic, no deva, no one at all in the whole world could turn that back. However, although no entity can turn it back, it's still subject to impermanence, and this wheel has been turning for 2,500 years, and many great monks have continued keeping it rolling, so to speak, starting with Venerable Saṃyutta and Venerable Mahamoggallana, the chief disciples of the Buddha. And with all this effort, it has been kept turning for 2.5 millennia. But like everything that is conditioned, the teaching of the Buddha is also conditioned. And this teaching will fade away, which is a strong reminder to us to use that teaching as long as it's available. What the teaching is leading to, what it's pointing at, what it is aiming for, the state of total freedom and release, nibbana, that is not subject to impermanence. Whether Buddhas arise or don't arise, whether anyone realizes nibbana or not, that state of total security, freedom, that is always available. However, the path leading there, as it has been described by the Buddha, that is subject to impermanence and can also be corrupted if the transmission is falsified. So as long as it's there, you should really go for it. And I think that most of you have probably heard about the Four Noble Truths, isn't it? Is there anyone here who has never heard of the Four Noble Truths? Probably no one. So you see the biggest bottleneck, this is where it's lacking. It's not so much usually that we haven't heard about the Four Noble Truths or the Eightfold Path, but what is often lacking is the commitment to be really dedicated to practice and develop that Noble Eightfold Path, to really investigate these Four Noble Truths, that we can not only commit it to heart in the Pali, or learn the English translation, or write a smart book about it, or give a nice smart talk about it, but that we can get to what this teaching is pointing to. And as the Dhamma is described, opanayiko, it's applicable, it's leading onwards, leading inwards, has to be applied in our own heart. I always like to give the simile when you read the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, and please don't read that like a fantasy novel or a crime novel or something like that. If you have a fascinating book in The Lord of the Rings, and maybe you start reading and you read away all night, but it doesn't really impact your life. It can be a beautiful escape, and you read these fascinating romans or whatever, and you're so absorbed you read it all night, but it has nothing to do with your life, isn't it? And in the morning then, if you stop reading, this is it. No, you can't really apply that. It has no relation. A fantasy novel has no relation to your life. this sutta is not so much like a fantasy novel, it's much more like, say, a cooking book. Do you read cooking books all night? Actually, some people claim they do that, but it's somewhat unusual. Now, how do you use a cooking book? You're in the kitchen, you actually want to do a certain dish, and then it's usually quite a handy book, and you have it right there on your desktop, and you read, and then you see 250 grams of flour, and then you get it. It's extremely practical. Or if you're not so much into cooking, if you're more like into a workshop, if you have the instruction manual for a power tool. I don't think many people read instruction manuals for their chainsaw or their new Hilti drill, just for fun at night. But you have this new chainsaw, and now you want to do it, or there's some problem, your power tool doesn't work, and you try to figure out what is the problem, and then you go through the instruction manual, troubleshooting this. This is how it's meant. It's very, very applicable. And we can see that straight away in the first noble truth. What is the first noble truth? Exactly, the noble truth of dukkha, of suffering, of the disappointing nature of all conditioned phenomena. The term suffering here is very wide. It doesn't just mean suffering in the normal sense of that English word, which is rather a bit intense. But it can mean any form of disappointment, anything that can't give you lasting, perfect satisfaction. And in that sense, even a pleasant feeling would be described by the Buddha as still being dukkha, because even the most pleasant feeling will not last forever. And when the pleasant feeling finally comes to an end, this is the suffering in that. And the more pleasant it was, the more unpleasant it is if it's finally over. And sometimes people feel not so inspired by a teaching that starts immediately with suffering. Oh, I don't want to hear about that. I want to hear about happiness. But I always felt that it's immediately applicable. Because I'm not sure about you, but I have experienced disappointment and internal pain, and when I heard about teaching that starts off by actually talking about that, I felt inspired, and I immediately feel that refers to me. This is something now I can actually feel I have experienced. And I can notice it's a little bit like the approach when you go to the doctor. Because first of all, when you go to the doctor, how does it usually go? Is it like you come in and you say, hi, how are you? And he says, oh, I'm fine, how are you? And you say, I'm fine. And then he says, here's your pills. And then you go away again. What do you normally do at the doctor?
Tell them what's going on.
Exactly. The doctor first has to check out what is the situation. And if you do it with a doctor like we do always when we greet each other, no, I'm fine, how are you? Yeah, I'm fine. It wouldn't really work. At the doctor you have to be honest. If someone asks you, how are you? I don't think it's necessarily smart to be too honest about that one, because I remember when I was young, even as a teenager, because sometimes I would do that. And someone asked me, how are you? And then I first start thinking, because it's sometimes not easy to exactly answer that. Now, if you try to answer it honestly, now, how am I? Yeah. And then people already get a little bit flustered, because if you don't answer immediately, it's not meant like that. If you ask someone, now, how are you? The idea is not that they now start investigating how are they actually, and then you have to wait till they finish that investigation, and then they start telling about their problems. You may become quite unpopular. So we have adopted the habit of pretending to each other that everything is fine, kind of keeping that facade, constantly assuring each other it's all good. But hopefully you're not doing that if you go to the doctor, because it wouldn't work. You have to say, you've got a headache and it seems to be getting worse, or you've got this lump and it's a little bit tender and it seems to be getting worse. Now, this is the very first thing. And the Buddha didn't try to pretend everything is good, but he would very honestly analyze what's the situation. And I think if we honestly analyze our situation as a human being, we are a bit in trouble, isn't it? Because even if you are a billionaire and young and healthy, that there's something happening in our body right now that makes it age all the time until it finally falls apart and the body dies. I mean, even just that much is enough to force us to admit that there is an issue, there's some problem. And of course, if we really get sick, if we have a pain condition, if we lose loved ones or dying, then suffering becomes very apparent. Depressive disorder, quite common nowadays. So I was actually happy that this is a good doctor who actually really checks you out and then identifies where's the problem. It's fascinating, even with the doctor, we have a similar tendency, because sometimes if there is something we like not to go, do you know that feeling that you think, oh, there's something, should I go to the doctor? And then you feel reluctant. So why do I feel reluctant if there's something wrong? Why are we reluctant to go to the doctor? Don't want to acknowledge that there's a problem. We want to rather live in the illusion that everything is fine than having it pointed out. But of course, one day, if you're really sick, that illusion can't be maintained. At some stage, then the pain or the disability never become too strong, and we have to face it. It's exactly the same with the dukkha the Buddha is talking about. And if we can just say, I don't want to hear about that, and I want to stay in the illusion that it's all good. But it's getting a little bit difficult once we turn 80 or 90 and in the nursing home and maybe lying in bed, or once the big disappointments or bereavement happens. So the Buddha, like a really good doctor, he first checks you out and finds, is there any issue? And what is the issue the Buddha identified that we all suffer from? The birth, old age, sickness, death, being together with what we don't like, being separated from what we like, not getting what we want. This is all suffering. However, a good doctor wouldn't just tell you what is wrong. Oh yeah, you have got this and that cancer. And then that's it. That would be disappointing. What does a good doctor do next? He investigates the cause of the disease. For example, if we have, say, pneumonia, which can be a life-threatening condition, I believe that is caused by a certain bacterium. Any of the doctors here? Which one is that? pneumococcus or something, Dr. Gamini? Pneumococcus, that's usually the bacterium causing the pneumonia. However, when someone is coughing, that could have other causes. What other causes are there for a cough? Could be lung cancer, could be a flu, could be smoking too much. So you have to find what is really the cause. And the doctor could just do a lab test, I guess, to find the pneumococcus. Anyway, it's testing for that, and then he identifies pneumococcus bacterium. This is the cause of your pneumonia. And once you have identified the cause, then you are addressing it. And that is where you give antibiotics to remove the cause, in this case the pneumococcus bacterium, with antibiotics. And once the pneumococcus is gone, what is the result? Yes, the pneumonia will go away. Because if you take the cause away of the sickness, then the result, the sickness, will also be taken away. This is how it works. So the Buddha followed exactly the same approach. So he identified the big problem we have, old age, sickness, death, and so on. And then he investigated the cause. I guess probably all of us have investigated the cause of our suffering, isn't it? They say even a worm will turn. When it hurts, we usually try to figure out, isn't it? If everything is fine, we are usually happy to just indulge and we don't have to think much. But the moment it hurts, we usually start thinking and trying to figure out, how can I get out of that? But often we don't go deep enough. The problem is that we usually look for external causes. Often some other human being. As long as this person is so mean, how can I ever be happy? This person is the cause of my suffering. Have you ever analyzed your suffering like that? Finding some other person where you're convinced this is the cause of my suffering? Now, the Buddha doesn't necessarily say this is totally wrong, because often there are multiple causes, not just one. But if we are investigating like that, and now we find that this person, maybe your spouse, or your child, or your parent, or your mother-in-law, or your boss, you identify, this is the cause of my suffering. And then we usually try to change these people, to make them act in such a way that we don't feel any pain anymore. Have you ever tried that? Probably yes, no? Have you been fully successful with that? This is quite difficult, no? It's not easy changing your boss or changing your spouse. I know dedicated wives who have been married for 50 years and they still don't feel they have succeeded in changing their spouse sufficiently. So this is the limitation of that approach. It's usually very difficult. You can try to wheedle and to convince and to twist their arm and to sweet talk them or to nag or to threaten or to teach. And then you may be a little bit successful. And even if you are very successful, or you get this person out of the way, that's what we often try. Can you somehow a little intrigue in your work, and then this person loses their job and then they're gone. And then you're happy. Does it work? Usually not, no, because then there's another person. If you actually succeed getting rid of the one person you think gives you all that suffering, then usually another one turns up. And another one. And what are your chances? Now, we have about 9 billion people on this earth, or was it 8? 8, no, sorry, I think it's 8. Around 8 billion people on earth. That changing all these people, that they never cause you suffering, is that realistic? Oh, no. The similar, all the other things we blame externally, maybe the weather, it's so cold and dry, too windy, and in summer it's too hot, or maybe politics, blaming the politics happening, and so on. It never resolves it. If you go for the external causes, you can manipulate them to some extent if you're smart and with great effort. For example, if it's too cold and dry, you can get the aircon on, and then maybe additionally you need a humidifier, and then you can operate that. But it never really resolves it completely, and some other problem comes. So the fascinating approach the Buddha took is actually looking internally. Because if there's an internal condition for suffering, a necessary condition, then we will also succeed if we remove the internal necessary condition. Necessary condition means that thing has to be there for the result to occur. And sometimes we meet multiple necessary conditions. For example, for me to be alive, I need food, I need to drink, and I need air, oxygen to breathe, and other things on top of that. But just taking these three. But if you wanted to get rid of me, so to speak, you wouldn't have to remove all conditions. Just one is enough. If I don't have any oxygen, I would die. But if I have oxygen, but I don't get any food, I will die. If I have food and oxygen and air to breathe, but I cannot drink, I would still die. So if there's a couple of necessary conditions for the result to occur, it's actually sufficient to remove only one. And if there's an internal condition for suffering, it is enough if I remove that. That's not denying that there's also external ones. But the external ones are difficult to control. Because it's so hard to change these people. It's so difficult to change the weather. But internally, it's also not exactly easy, I admit. But at least it's possible. Isn't it? No? Would you agree with that? The internal things, now I have a better way of influencing that than outside. This is why the Buddha looked for internal conditions. Because he knew internally you can actually work with that. And if it is a necessary condition, it will be enough to remove the suffering, the result. Even if all these external conditions are unchanged, they are still there. But the internal necessary condition is taken away, and then the suffering will be gone. So that was the revolutionary approach. That is what required, and there's so much wisdom. And you can see it in our own life, how we always go for the external causes. always blaming something outside, that I have to suffer so much. And it took this unique wisdom, parami, this unique wisdom faculty from the Buddha to turn instead the investigation inside and to identify a necessary condition for suffering inside, which is craving, the tanha, literally thirst. This constant thirst, this constant desire, craving, hankering, the central desire not to be, to exist, and sometimes the desire to just annihilate oneself, just finish it all off. This is a necessary condition, because if we didn't have any craving, any desire, then suffering would also go away, be eliminated. So we have to go this indirect approach, because that really removes the cause. Often we make the mistake that we try to get rid of the suffering directly, try to run away. If someone causes us difficulty and pain, and we just try never to see that person. This is not directly running away from suffering. It's a superficial treatment. It's like going to the doctor with a bad pneumonia, and the doctor just gives you a cough syrup, which is suppressing the coughing reflex. Because there's medication which stops you coughing, isn't it? Is that a sufficient treatment for the pneumonia if I just stop him coughing? No, that would be a big problem. They stop coughing, but the pneumonia is still there. The real cause hasn't been removed. And they're going to die even if they don't cough. So this external or fiddling around and just running away from suffering, this is like this superficial treatment. It will not really work. You may have gotten a little bit of a relief, but a good doctor goes for the cause, the bacterium, and then the antibiotics. The good Dhamma practitioner goes for the real deep internal cause of suffering, craving, and to abandon that craving, to let go of that craving. Because then you have removed the deep cause, and then suffering is removed forever. It's completely cured. And this is the third noble truth. The removing of craving and the consequent removal of suffering, the end of suffering, that is called the third noble truth. And this is also what is called Nibbana. This is the easiest definition of Nibbana, because it's often not so easy to get one's mind around. What does Nibbana mean? Is there anything or is there nothing? Or is it happiness? But if one doesn't feel anything, how can it be happiness? So an easy definition of Nibbana is simply the end of all form of pain and suffering, the end of craving. And of course, a good doctor, once you go to the doctor, he checks out what exactly is the problem. He identifies the problem, he gives you the diagnosis. This is why I would always ask for a proper diagnosis when you go to the doctor. They have to commit, force them, they have to give a diagnosis. But then they also give you usually a prescription. And if they can treat it, they have diagnosed it, and now they can give you a treatment. And you may have to take these antibiotics twice a day, morning and evening with a meal, and this other pill once a day before the meal, and then you should lie in bed and keep warm or whatever. A treatment plan, a prescription for your medication. And the Buddha did that for us as well. What is the prescription you got from the Buddha? Have you got your prescription? What's your treatment plan to get you cured from death and pain? Purifying the mind. Yeah, that is true, but it would be a very general instruction. It's like the doctor is giving you a prescription, take medicine. It's not wrong, take medicine, but you want it more specific. Do we have a more specific instruction? How do we purify the mind? How do I do that? The Noble Eightfold Path, exactly. That's the prescription. Is there a question? Little girl is asking a question. Yeah. No craving. Exactly. But how do you abandon craving? It's not so easy. For example, if you really like to eat, what is your favorite sweets? Do you like candy? Lollies? Would your mother always give you as many lollies as you like? This is a good mother. A good mother doesn't give you always as much lollies as you like, because it's bad for health and for the teeth. Now, if you really want a lolly, and mother says you already had 3 today, it's too bad for your teeth, and you don't get another one, do you find it easy to let go of the craving for the lolly? Really easy? Your mother can remind you next time now. You can say, you said to the monk, it's actually easy to let go of the craving. Congratulations to you, you're lucky. I know many little kids and I know many adults who don't find it easy to let go of craving. This is why the Buddha has given us a very comprehensive treatment plan, a very good prescription. This is a Noble Eightfold Path. Wide view, wide intention, wide communication, wide action, wide livelihood, wide effort, wide mindfulness, wide concentration. And he has taught for 45 years, filling in the prescription, because you could go under any of these headings. Just one heading, wide mindfulness. You must be aware that there's a discourse, the Satipatthana Sutta. There's even a Mahasatipatthana Sutta, the great discourse on wide mindfulness. It is very long. And it's just under that heading. And similar, there's other discourses, other teachings, which explain in more detail each of these factors in the Noble Eightfold Path. So we have a very, very comprehensive, holistic treatment plan. It's really good natural medicine. It doesn't have bad side effects. It already starts working even if you don't take everything, you already have some benefit, which is also really good. So even if you feel the treatment plan is a little bit more than I feel I'm able to do, you can just start with parts of it, and already your health will improve. It already will give you a benefit. And it's the most amazing prescription you can have. If your doctor tells you, by the way, I can give you a prescription against death. What would you do? You wouldn't even believe him. It sounds too good to be true. Medicine against dying? That you never die? If he told you that he can give you medicine, a treatment plan, that you never ever get sick anymore, ever? It's unbelievable, isn't it? This is what we have got. You have got the prescription, the treatment plan, how you can cure yourself from death. How you can cure yourself from any disease. You never ever get sick again. How you can treat yourself against any form of pain, that you never will have to suffer pain again. Now imagine your doctor can't give you maybe a prescription against death, but maybe there's a new treatment, you haven't heard about it, and if you take that you will never ever get cancer. If your doctor convincingly can tell you that there's a pill which has no negative side effects, you take it once a day and you're absolutely sure you cannot get any form of cancer ever. And he gives you the prescription. Would you take it? Or would you just go home and then you say, okay, I put that here on my table and maybe next week I go to the pharmacy and get that pill. And then you forget it. And then someone reminds you, don't you want to take the pill that you never ever get cancer? And you say, yeah, maybe next week. This week I'm quite busy, maybe next year. Would you do that? It sounds crazy, no? If you have a working prescription that you can never get cancer, and you're just too lazy to somehow get it and take it, that would be insane. Now we have the prescription to get out of death, to get out of sickness, to get out of ever experiencing pain and suffering again. But we are just too lazy to really take it. No? Isn't it shocking? So my suggestion would be that we actually take the medicine the Buddha prescribed, that we actually follow the treatment plan to the letter, or at least to the best of our ability as much as we can. Because the benefits are so outrageous that they don't compare to anything. So that's maybe a good end for this little Dhamma sharing. Let us all take the medicine the Buddha prescribed. Let us all try our level best to follow the treatment plan the Buddha has given us to the letter as good as we can. Thank you.